Okay, let's dive right into this. Imagine spending your entire life building this magnificent cathedral of trust, only to wake up one day and realize the foundation was actually built on sand. For over a century, the name Toshiba stood as an absolute titan of global engineering. I mean, we're talking about a towering symbol of Japanese precision, innovation, and unwavering integrity. But behind the glossy brochures, the cutting-edge laptops, and the nuclear power plants, a quiet, systematic rot was spreading. In this explainer, we aren't just looking at some dry financial breakdown. We're getting into the incredible, dark story of how a 140-year-old titan was completely destroyed from the inside out.
$1.2 billion. Let that sink in for a second. Over the course of 7 years, one of the most respected corporations on Earth systematically cooked its books by more than $1.2 billion. And you know what the most terrifying part of this whole thing is? This massive, institutionalized lie was protected because everyone inside the system knew it was happening, but absolutely nobody dared to speak up.
Section 1. The perfect corporate facade. 140-year legacy compromised. So when you think of Toshiba, you're likely picturing consumer electronics, pioneering semiconductors, and just this pristine global reputation, right? But what the world discovered in 2015 was a literal masterclass in deception. Let's walk through how this actually unfolded. Toshiba was founded way back in 1875, and it wasn't just another company, it was a cornerstone of the Japanese economic miracle. Fast forward to the modern era, specifically when Atsutoshi Nishida took over as CEO in 2005. The momentum was incredibly strong, right up until they hit a massive brick wall, the 2008 global financial crisis. As markets collapsed worldwide, demand for Toshiba's televisions and computers absolutely plummeted, and their profits cratered. Now, for a normal company, missing targets during a once-in-a-generation economic meltdown would mean having some honest restructuring and frank conversations with shareholders. But at Toshiba, admitting failure was culturally and professionally fatal. So, the 2008 crash acted as the ultimate catalyst, triggering a fateful, disastrous shift in their entire corporate strategy.
Moving to Section 2, the danger of the challenge, the price of absolute obedience.
To really grasp the crime here, we have to look at the toxic culture that fueled it. Within Toshiba's walls, untouchable patriarchs demanded absolute obedience. Questioning a superior wasn't seen as critical thinking. It was viewed as professional rebellion. And that is exactly why leadership was able to establish this terrifying new management technique known internally as the challenge. Now, on paper, it probably sounded like healthy corporate motivation, but in practice, it was a complete trap for middle managers. It was a weaponized demand for impossible financial results, entirely detached from actual market reality.
This dynamic perfectly illustrates the exact bind middle managers were placed in. On one hand, you have the market reality. A division head would come in and present a realistic financial forecast, maybe showing a modest profit or even a minor loss, because hey, there's a global recession happening. But on the other hand, senior management would just instantly reject it. They would impose this arbitrary, highly inflated profit target that had literally zero connection to reality. So trapped between the unyielding demands of their bosses and the very real threat of being exiled from the company, middle managers realized they only had one choice if they wanted to keep their jobs. They had to fake it. And that brings us to a crucial point, the sheer scale of the complicity. 98. We're not talking about a lone rogue accountant working in a dark room at midnight to skim some money off the top. No way. An independent investigative panel later revealed that 98 corporate executives were actively and systematically engaged in cooking the books. This fraud was baked right into the daily operations of multiple tech divisions.
And if someone actually tried to push back, when a subordinate pointed out that the market demand simply wasn't there, or that pushing these numbers would violate compliance, senior executives would shut them down ruthlessly. They'd use lines like, "Do not bring me problems, bring me solutions. Make the numbers work." Charanji. That culture of fear completely silenced any compliance concerns and basically forced subordinates to manufacture profits out of thin air.
All right, Section 3, Anatomy of the Lie, the mechanics of window dressing.
So how did they pull it off? Well, this wasn't some incredibly complex offshore money laundering scheme. It was an insidious day-to-day manipulation of standard corporate accounting. The core mechanism they relied on was known as window dressing. Basically, it's the systematic manipulation of corporate accounting to artificially inflate your current financial health. This wasn't a sudden, sophisticated cyber attack. It was a slow, deliberate fraud coordinated via everyday internal emails, pushed over standard telephone calls, and woven into the very fabric of Toshiba's business.
I really want to walk you through these 3 specific accounting tricks forensically because it shows exactly how the lie compounded. Step 1.
pushing out costs. When a manufacturing plant ran massively over budget, managers would simply hide the expenses. They just deferred them to future years to pretend the bills didn't even exist yet. Step 2. Booking future profits early. If they expected a big sale next year, they just recorded that expected revenue today, which artificially inflated the current quarter's balance sheet. And step 3. Channel stuffing and sweeping. All those unsold products just sitting around in warehouses, they were papered over as sold, and massive losses in troubled subsidiaries were quietly swept under the rug of entirely unrelated business units. This is exactly why the lies compounded year after year, because to cover up yesterday's fake profits, they literally had to invent even bigger fake profits for tomorrow. It's like a giant, terrible puzzle.
Which brings us to Section 4. The inevitable collapse, unraveling the multi-billion-dollar fraud. Look, every perfect crime eventually leaves a footprint, right? You simply cannot bend the fundamental rules of accounting forever without reality catching up to you. After years of whispered rumors in Tokyo's financial corridors, the first real crack appeared in early 2015 when Japan's Securities and Exchange Surveillance Commission received a confidential tip. What started out as a pretty routine inspection rapidly accelerated into an absolute nightmare. Investigators started demanding internal emails and interviewing managers under oath. By July 2015, the pressure was so intense it culminated in mass resignations from top leadership. And the fallout didn't stop there. It ultimately led to Toshiba's humiliating delisting from the Tokyo Stock Exchange post-2015.
Faced with immense federal pressure during that 2015 audit, Toshiba was forced to establish an independent investigation committee, bringing in outside lawyers and forensic accountants. And these outsiders, they broke straight through that culture of silence. They cared absolutely nothing for Toshiba's 140-year history. They simply stripped away the internal loyalties, ignored the politics, and followed the data. Ultimately, they published a blistering 300-page report that finally exposed this systematic top-down manipulation to the entire world. The House of Cards had completely collapsed.
And the devastating final tally uncovered by that investigation? A staggering $1.56 billion. That is $1.56 billion in fabricated operating profits spread across 7 years of deception. This wasn't just an accounting error. It was a deeply institutionalized illusion that plunged an iconic brand into a crisis from which it would never truly recover.
Now, when white-collar crime happens behind closed boardroom doors, it is far too easy to view it as a victimless crime, just a matter of shifting numbers on a spreadsheet. But the human collateral paid by honest workers and retail investors was truly devastating. For everyday shareholders, billions in market value just evaporated, wiping out the life savings and pension funds of everyday citizens who had placed blind faith in the company's pristine reputation. And what about the honest, rank-and-file employees who had literally nothing to do with the fraud? They woke up to find their entire corporate identity tarnished. They faced severe restructuring, massive layoffs, and the heavy humiliation of wearing the uniform of a disgraced institution.
The legal and financial penalties that followed were historic. Toshiba was slapped with massive regulatory fines and faced sweeping class action lawsuits, demanding hundreds of millions of dollars in damages. To survive this immense fallout, the once mighty conglomerate was backed into a corner. They were forced into a desperate fire sale, systematically hollowing out their business. They literally had to strip away their crown jewels, spinning off their highly prized medical and semiconductor divisions just to stay alive.
Let's wrap this up with Section 5. Lessons from the fallout. Universal warnings for the modern business world.
This historic corporate postmortem isn't just a story about the past, it is incredibly relevant for today's market. Let's clearly lay out 3 critical lessons we need to take away from this. First, unrealistic expectations breed corruption. When leadership imposes impossible targets without any regard for market reality, they are actively incentivizing fraud over actual performance. Second, culture eats compliance for breakfast. You can have all the rulebooks, all the software, and all the compliance seminars in the world. But if the underlying corporate culture demands absolute, unquestioning obedience, and if employees fear punishment more than they value truth, ethical boundaries will inevitably collapse. And third, transparency is non-negotiable. Covering up a small loss today just to protect short-term pride basically guarantees a catastrophic explosion tomorrow. Which leaves us with this final, lingering question to think about. If a 140-year-old titan can fall to paper illusions, how safe is your portfolio? It's a pretty stark reminder that empires built on paper illusions always face a reckoning, and reality always collects its debts in the end. Absolutely no institution is too big, too historic, or too revered to fail when it loses its moral compass. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I hope this gave you a powerful look into the hidden mechanics of corporate deception. Stay curious, stay vigilant, and I'll see you next time.